must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily.
Hello everybody and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine Holt and I'm your host. And as always, I'm extremely excited about this evening's show. I have with me a special guest, Lisa Maldonaldo. But before I introduce my guest, I want to do a little commentary. As most of my viewers know, I am a strong supporter of Code Pink. And Code Pink, as we know, is Women for Peace. I want to flash this picture on the screen here. This is called Yes, We Can Live in Peace. This is something that I saw on the Code Pink website. And what was really interesting to me is, along with finding this particular picture, I also found a little letter from Alice Walker, and she talked about we can offer what we are. And I want to flash the picture, and I just want to read something to you. Here's what Alice Walker has to say. During the recent ruthless assault on the people of Gaza, when so many people were injured or murdered, I lost my own sister. She had been ill for many years. And you know, losing a sister, I know I have a sister. I would feel horrible if that happened to me. The loss of this one person whose death was anticipated was such a blow that when I considered the losses of the people of Gaza, of mothers, children, fathers, brothers, uncles, cousins, and friends, I wondered how the anguish of so much tragic loss could be sustained. You know, those are very interesting thoughts, and I really appreciate that Alice Walker wrote this letter. It's on the website Pink Talk. And at the end of my show, I'm going to flash the website, so if you want to see further information about this letter, please feel free to do so. But what it really hit home for me is I began to think, you know, we just had these horrible plane crashes. Fortunately, one group survived, but another group died. 48 people were killed almost instantly. The nation grieved. We all grieve for those families. I remember being in front of my television set and just crying, just thinking, oh my God, what if this was my family? What if this were my sister, my brother, my mother, my friend? You know, all the things that go through your mind when such a tragedy happens. Well, you know, we have to have the same kind of thinking about people in other countries, about people in Iraq, about people in the Gaza Strip, about people in Israel, about people in Pakistan. I mean, for heaven's sakes, young children being killed like that, women and children. Why? And do you think for one moment that those people are any different than us? That they don't grieve their families? That they don't grieve their children? Well, you know something, if we think they're any different than us, well, we need to rethink for a while. Because these are still human beings. These are still human beings with feelings. And we all love our children. And as you know, my show is dedicated to women. It's dedicated to women and children. And my basic philosophy is, if you're going to do something, ask one question. Is it good for the children? If it's not good for the children, my suggestion is, please, let us not do it. Because believe it or not, there's an old saying, there but poor fortune go you or I. If they can do it over there, they can do it over here. And we need to think about that. So in my mind, I want to flash that picture. Yes, we can live in peace, but we have to make a commitment to peace. We have to make a commitment to saying enough is enough. No more wars, no more dropping bombs on innocent civilians. You know, we need to start placing it. There's an old saying that I read the other day, books, not bombs, food, not bombs. Healthcare, not bombs. I mean, I can go on and on. But anyway, that is a lot to digest, and I hope everybody thinks about it. And you know, feel free to give me write me an email at Elaine Holtz at Elaine Holtz, ELAINEHOLTZ.com, and let me know at yahoo.com. I'm sorry, and let me know what you're thinking. You know, what do you think about what I said? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? What are you doing to help stop it? I mean, all kinds of questions in our mind. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and of course, thank you so much for viewing Women's Spaces. And without further ado, I want to introduce my guest, Lisa Maldonado. Lisa, Welcome to Women's Spaces.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. And I am so impressed when I read your resume, and so I just want to do a little bit of introduction for you. Lisa Maldonado is the Executive Director, and I'm going to flash this on the screen so everybody can see. She is the Executive Director of the North Bay Labor Council, AFL-CIO, where she directs the coordinated efforts of local unions in Marin, Sonoma County, Mendocino, and Lake County. And she's working collectively to mobilize workers, and she's very much involved with the Employees Free Choice Act, which we will talk about as we get into the program. Well, Lisa, what I like to do, how I like to start my program out, is let my guests tell my viewers a little bit about themselves, anything that you feel is important for us to know.
Well, I guess I could start by saying that I'm really happy to be working in the union movement right now for working families. I think we've all been talking about a time of change, and historically a lot of parallels are being made about the New Deal and the 30s with the economy, the way things are. And I think what we're seeing in the labor movement right now is a resurgence of hope in unions and in workers organizing and bargaining for better lives and better benefits. And so that is really exciting for me. I'm very happy to be working for the labor movement right now. And I guess you could say it's something I've always been into. My family is a very committed kind of labor activist type family. My mom's a teacher, retired with CTA. My dad was a Teamster for many, many years and a laborer. And my brother has worked for Unite Here, SEIU, Local 2. And my aunt is even CSEA, the school employees. So and my grandfather, who's still alive and participated in 1934 general strikes, worked for cement masons for many years. So a long history of labor folks.
Well, we have something in common. My father, Solomon Holtz, bless his soul, was also a union man. In fact, he was very involved in the union movement in the 20s and the 30s. In fact, I remember one time when he showed me the scar on his head and said, "You know something, Elaine? If the unions go, the countries go." And one thing that we need as we go into the conversation, I want to plant a seed to my viewers to remember, without the unions, we would not have vacations. Without the unions, we would not have any kind of decent wage. We would not have an 8-hour day. I mean, if my father always used to say, give the bosses the chance, they'll have you working 16 hours a day for nothing.
It's true.
So it's just very, very interesting. Well, tell me a little bit about some of the other areas that you've worked. Right now, I know you're working in Sonoma County, but prior to this, because you have a very, very interesting resume. In fact, when I look at some of your volunteer work, it's just amazing. You want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm an attorney. I've been to law school. I'm not practicing law right now, but my previous long-term job was as a field director for the ACLU of Northern California, which is a really well-known civil rights organization. Loved working there. But after I went to law school, I got into union organizing and union political work. So I worked for the California Faculty Association for a while, doing organizing for state university professors. But the volunteer stuff you're talking about, I'm currently on the committee for Measure O, which is the City of Santa Rosa committee, which deals with gang prevention and the Measure O task force. And I've just been appointed to the Commission on the Status of Women, which is another, really important interest of mine. I used to work for many years for a battered women's shelter. I worked for a homeless shelter. I worked for an organization called the Homeless Prenatal Program for many years in San Francisco. So I guess I have all of the kind of progressive, progressive kind of causes in my heart that are still things I like to work for. Volunteer for.
Before we go into the union activities, I'm just curious, we were talking a little bit about Measure O. Can you explain it a little bit? Tell our viewers exactly what Measure O is all about.
Yeah, well, Measure O was an ordinance that was passed by voters here in Santa Rosa, and it was specifically to develop funds for, gang prevention. And portions of the money go to police and fire to deal with their part in the gang prevention. It's actually a little controversial right now. It's been in the news a bit because the city is having, like all cities, counties, states, and everything, are having these fiscal crisis. And so the ordinance is actually written right now that allows the city to use some of those funds for other purposes. And so that's kind of been in the papers right now about having to have the city council declare a fiscal emergency so some of those funds can be used in other ways. But the problem or the overall goal, which is helping to do gang prevention and deal with any kind of gang issues in this city, is still remaining the goal of the measure.
It's so interesting when you say, the city has, they're cutting funds. Of course, they have to cut school funds and all the different services that we offer our youth, which is very, very sad. And I just want to make a little statement, I throw this in again. If we would stop all these wars, for God's sakes, we would have the money that we need to fund gang prevention. And I don't like to call it gang prevention. I like to call it like getting the young people to kind of diversify, to move into other areas, to use the skills. Most people don't realize that being a part of a gang is actually a very skillful thing. And if you can transfer those skills, could you comment on that just a little bit?
Well, yeah, I think that what you're saying is totally true about, and we've seen this when we look at nationally at the stimulus bill, we look at the bailouts that we've had to do. There's money there when we need to do it. There's, what's lacking is political will, right? When we make a commitment to something, we end up finding the money, even though, whether it's for something as misery-making as a war, or as hard to do as bailing out these Wall Street people, they can find the money. The problem is that we need to make the lives of our children and our own communities as important as those other issues are. We need to create that sense of importance. So, people start asking about, there's a violence and poverty too that needs to be eradicated. That's just as important. And if people started seeing those things as imperatives instead of as, extras, then I think we'd have a much better society.
Oh, I totally agree with you, and I want to make a funny comment right now. They say behind every great man is a woman. Well, if you look, oftentimes our political leaders are men, and I want them to hear that there's some pretty strong women behind them pushing to get some better things done for our children.
That's
and
right.
One of them,
that's right. We need to push harder.
That's right, exactly. I agree with you, and that's what I try to encourage my women viewers to do. Get off your duff. Do something for peace. Start speaking out for the children. It's just amazing. Well, let's segue now into your job right now as the executive director and what exactly it entails. You want to give us an overview on that?
Sure. Yeah, unions have been kind of the voice for working people and a voice on the job, but also a voice, politically. And so the labor councils exist to kind of coordinate the political voice for working people, working families in the counties and in the local areas. And towards that, what we do is we coordinate the lobbying efforts. We work, and this is not just for union workers. So, for example, if there's a living wage ordinance, we support that strongly. Our goal is to make working people's concerns in the forefront of elected officials, politicians, and any policymaker. Because unfortunately, what happens is you get folks making laws and making policy who don't understand how working people have to live, how hard it is, and what our concerns are. And so we want to make sure that we use our strength and our members' collective resources to elect people and support people that care about working families.
You make a very interesting point there, Lisa, when you talk about that there are people in control, because I often scratch my head and say, how are these people making the decisions? Don't they understand what goes on the, on the ground here? So what you're saying, what I heard you say was that sometimes the officials that are elected really do not have the experience of being a working person. Is that what you're saying?
Well, some don't, and some don't, and some just have never considered it. And some have either an ideological reason or some may know, but they don't care. Our goal is to make sure that people do care and that they do look at things from the position and the perspective of working families. And usually that makes for the whole community healthier anyway. So most elected leaders, we would hope, would at least consider working people's concerns.
Well, that brings me to an interesting question. What do you think, what is the current state right now of workers' rights? I know there's a lot going on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Employee Free Choice Act, but can you give us an overview of how you see that right now?
Well, again, it's an exciting time, and it's really different time, because what we're seeing are these huge disparities, right, between incredibly wealthy people who have manage to make obscene amounts of money. And then your average everyday working person who's kind of at the end of the month looking at bills, looking at the mortgage, trading off, paying one bill this month. And, there's such an extreme difference now that I think it's finally seeping into consciousness that you can't have a healthy economy or a healthy community with those kind of disparities in wealth.
I just love the way you articulate that. I mean, it's so clear. You cannot have a healthy community when you have the disparity, when you have someone so wealthy that they can have beyond what they need and someone so poor they can't even get a meal for their child. I mean, that is heartbreaking. I mean, and then you start wondering, what is the consciousness of the people that allows that to happen? I mean, I think we all have to take some responsibility there to at least start evaluating and looking at and seeing what it is that we can support. So let's go into the next thing. What right now is the priority of the labor movement? If you'd like, then we can bring in this Employee Free Choice Act.
Well, the Employee Free Choice Act is our main goal right now, and it's a huge priority for the labor movement, because what we've seen for the last, just 20 years, or even go further back than that, a real war on working people and on working people's ability to organize. What we know is that most people would want a union in their business or in their community, in their workplace, if they could. But what we have seen is a huge industry growing up of anti-union. Some of them are called union avoidance, but they're basically union busters, professional consultants that a lot of companies will hire to keep the unions out. And they skirt the law. A lot of times they intimidate, they coerce, they threaten. And what it creates is a situation at work where people who want to have a union feel intimidated and are basically afraid because that they'll lose their jobs. So what we need the Employee Free Choice Act for is to put some teeth and punish CEOs and employers who coerce workers for their right to organize, and also to kind of allow workers to be able to organize with using what are called majority sign-up cards, so that you don't have to have a huge process through the NLRB, which right now has been pretty anti-worker because of a lot of the appointees in the past administrations.
Well, also, I think they're anti-workers because workers want decent wages. Workers want benefits. Workers affect the bottom line, and I think what has to happen is that we have to get out of that bottom line thinking and start thinking of humanitarian. What is good for the community? What is good for the children? What is good for the workers? Safety. You brought up another point that we were talking about, that how unions really help make the world a little bit safer for us. You were talking about the hospital, for example.
Yeah, one of our big organizing campaigns, or a big campaign here locally, has been Memorial Hospital. And one of the things that, we've been in a lot of strikes, a lot of community folks are involved in trying to get Memorial Hospital to allow their workers to have majority card signups. And, when you think about it as consumers, especially medical consumers, we're really at the mercy of the people in that hospital. You and I don't know, if we go in for a procedure, what's the right way it should be done, how many people should be doing it. And if the hospital wants to cut corners, or the hospital's only looking at the bottom line, which, as you know, a lot of healthcare, it's become a corporation, it's become a business. And if they say, well, you can do it with only one respiratory therapist, we're basically at their mercy and have to take what they say on faith. If there's a union worker in there who's not afraid, who has job security, and who could speak up and say, wait a minute, this isn't performed safely, you need two people to perform it, or this equipment is outmoded, it's not safe, we need better equipment. Those people need job security, and they need to have a voice at work, because they're the front lines of defending our health as well. And I want to have workers who feel safe and who are not afraid they're going to lose their job, so they'll keep silent about either equipment or procedures that are not done in the best way, so that the corporation or the hospital can have a higher profit. And that's just one of the ways that union workers help. The same is true in other industries like electrical work, solar installation, any of those areas where safety and hazard is really important. You want a union worker there.
It's real interesting. I need to say something here. When you talk about people who are against unions, I know it was during the Reagan years that really there was a big union bashing at the time. But you know, it's interesting because what you're saying about that they create a web of safety for us, and they also make sure that we have equal pay, that we have benefits, and all the other good things that come into the workplace. So it seems to me that people need to think, if they're against a union, are they saying they're against safety? They're against good wages? You know, they're against health care? I mean, you really have to start thinking what you mean when you say you're against the union.
Right.
I mean, it just occurred to me as you were talking, oftentimes we don't think in that realm. You know, we think, oh, the union, because there's so much propaganda.
Oh,
and
yeah,
and
there
who owns the corporate media? Hey, the bosses.
Exactly.
Anyway, I want to go into one other issue now, and that is, what are some of the challenges today for working families in two areas? The first area is, of course, wages and work safety and all the other things you were talking about. And the second thing is what are some of the challenges when people try to actually form unions in their workplace that made this so important, this particular act?
Well, I think what we've seen, if you look back, we have seen this industry, this union busting industry, and corporations, you know, basically there have been, I think, over almost 30,000 complaints that have been found to be employers firing union organizers, workers who were organizing their unions in their job site, unfounded illegal firings a year. So that's a huge amount. Those are only the ones that we actually see. So you have to know that there are people, and this is what we see workers be subject to are mandatory meetings, right? All of a sudden you're counseled, you're brought into the office and you're told, you know, if the union comes in, we might have to shut down. If the union comes in, we might have to lay people off. Now, all these things are, you know, illegal, but for a lot of workers, by the time, and if you have a mortgage and you have children, you're asking people to make a huge sacrifice because they're being threatened with the loss of their job. And sure, you'll get your job back eventually if it's an illegal firing, but that might be 4 years later. In the meantime, what are you going to do? So it creates a huge disincentive for people to be able to really organize for their own interests, and it creates a huge incentive for corporations and these bosses to just consider that the price of doing business. A lot of them, because the rules are and the penalties for coercion and intimidation of employees are so negligible, they just consider that the price of doing business, and they go ahead and do it and pay the fine.
You know, that's really interesting. You know, when you start talking about that, I start thinking, if we don't stand up for this, we're going to end up being in some form of slavery. I mean, the wages are already going down in this country. You know, look at all the unemployment that's happening now, all the layoffs and firing. I often wonder if they had some union representatives there that maybe they could have helped nip the problem right in the bud.
Well,
you know?
exactly. And I think the problem, too, is the mindset. You were talking about earlier getting people's frame of reference to change. And I think what's happened in the past, certainly the past generation since I've started working, is you have this mindset of people who won't blink an eye at some CEO or obscene amounts of money, right? Literally billions of dollars for developing a new way to market pornography or a better way to put spam on your computer, right? They won't blink an eye if you say that person's making billions a year. But if you tell them a bus driver is going to make $70,000 a year, which, by the way, isn't really even enough to do that well, right, in this county, oh my God, that's terrible. Oh, you know, these inflated salaries. We see it now with the state workers. The state workers are taking these huge hits, having to let go of two days of vacations. And everybody I mean, you have these other workers. I think people who don't understand what unions have been fighting for, saying, well, I don't get those kind of vacation days, so why should anybody? And again, if you go to Europe or any other civilized nation, which hopefully will become a civilized nation one day, they get the whole month off. Everybody, every worker does. And what we're seeing are people who are so, unfortunately, used to not, it becomes a race to the bottom. And if I don't have health care, why should anybody have health care? Instead of saying, why can't all workers have health care? We work hard, all of us. If we all work for this, why should the CEO be making obscene amounts of money and we don't get health care for our kids or 2 days off? That's not right.
I think the reason it happens because we're listening to too many pundits that are telling us that somehow we do not have a right to have a good paying job. I mean, it really disturbed me when I hear the auto industry that they're willing to cut their salary I mean, the union's negotiating a cut in salary so these people can maintain their job. I mean, it's really, really sad.
And that's a perfect example, too, because if you look at that, right, here you had these CEOs of General Motors flying to Washington in their own private jets, okay, to ask for bailout. And meanwhile, all these pundits on TV are talking about how it's the guy on the line making $25 an hour, the union guy. He's the reason GM's going broke, not these guys who are making so many overinflated salaries and bonuses. It's just the guy on the line who's getting $25 an hour plus retirement benefits. That's what's breaking GM. And that's the mentality we need to change. We need to realize, like you said, there's enough for people to have decent wages and health care benefits and live a retirement with dignity. If you do the day's work, you deserve that. And it's not fair for these CEOs to make 4,000 times what the average worker does and then run the company into the ground, as we've seen, and then give themselves a bonus or a bailout after they've destroyed the company. And what do the workers get? 6 months of unemployment.
Well, Lisa, we have covered an amazing amount of information. And you know, time goes by so quickly. We're having a good time. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on Women's Spaces. And I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of the workers here in Sonoma County and on behalf of the workers across the nation. You know, we need more women like you.
Right.
You know, we need more women on the front line saying and doing exactly what you were saying. So thank you so much, Lisa Maldonado, for being on Women's Spaces.
Thank you so much for having me. And if I could just tell everybody out there, go to the website, find out about Employee Free Choice Act, and send a letter to Feinstein, Senator Feinstein, telling her why we need this.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I couldn't have said it any better.
Thanks.
And to my women listeners, my women viewers, excuse me, as I do at the end of every program, is to remind you, get off your duff. Do something for peace. The very least you can do is write your representatives and make one suggestion. Before they make any decision, before they make any vote, they ask one specific question. Is it good for the children? You know, decent wages are good for the children. It puts good food, you know, good food on the table. It pays your rent. It gets you good health care. I mean, all the things that we depend on wages. And we need good wages. But like I say, write them, ask them one specific question before they make a vote. Is it good for the children? If it's not good for the children, you know what my thought is? Don't do it. Forget it. You know, forget it. Just forget it. Anyway, this is Elaine Holtz with Women's Spaces saying goodbye until the next time.
A woman in your life who will do what she must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the